the 21st meeting for fiscal year 2021 of the Advisory Finance Committee. And as soon as I could find the governor's statement, I will read it. Bear with me, please.
Okay.
So pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12th, 2020 order, suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, and the governor's March 15th, 2020 order imposing strict limitation on the number of people that may gather in one place, this meeting of the Westborough Advisory Finance Committee will be conducted via remote participation to the greatest extent possible. Specific information and the general guidelines for remote participation by members of the public and/or parties with a right and/or requirement to attend this meeting can be found on the Town of Westborough's website at town.westborough.ma.us. For this meeting, members of the public who wish to watch the meeting may do so in the following manner. You may watch live on www.youtube.com/Westborough TV or on Westborough TV, Verizon Channel 28 or Charter Channel 192. Or you may watch a recorded version on the website westboroughTV.org under the Government tab, Meetings on Demand. No in-person attendance of members of the public will be permitted, but every effort is being made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings in real time via technological means. In the event that we are unable to do so, despite best efforts, we will post on the Town of Westborough's website an audio or video recording, transcript, or other comprehensive record of proceedings as soon as possible after the meeting. Speaking of the governor's, well, let me save that for later. So the first order of business is the minutes of the meeting of April 5th, 2021. You've all had them sent to you. Do I have a motion to accept?
Motion to accept the minutes of April 5th, 2021.
Second?
Bradley, second.
Any discussion? So let's move to a vote. Ms. Blumberg.
Blumberg, yes.
Ms. Board.
Board, yes.
Mr. Bradley.
Bradley, yes.
Ms. Hensley.
Hensley, yes.
Mr. Ugal.
Yes.
Mr. Leslie.
Yes.
Mr. Rauch.
Yes.
Dr. Siddiqui.
Siddiqui, yes.
And Beretti, yes. Okay, that was 900. I know there's a different, we were going to get into the articles right away as the next order of business, but if you'll allow me, I'd like to move the chairman's brief up to this point because I'm going to give you some top line information from the finance team meeting of last week, which may have some influence on your thinking as we go through the rest of the articles and the rest of the budget. So the finance team is composed of 9 people, myself included, and it meets at least once a month to go through some of the details of what's going on in the bowels of the town hall with respect to the finances of the town. This past week, we spoke about the availability and timing of both the federal American Protection Act funds and the money coming from the state, Chapter 70 in particular, and some of the ins and outs that are going on at the state level. let me speak first to the federal funds. We are due to receive, based on the latest information we have from the Treasury Department, $5.6 million in round numbers. We're going to receive that money in two tranches, approximately $1.9 million in 2021, and the balance $3.7 million in 2022. Those funds have to be expended by the end of 2024. What can they be used for? Right now, without specific guidance, but with understanding, the funds may be used to replace lost revenue or revenue reduced as a result of the pandemic. They can fund COVID-related costs. They could provide support to aid households and businesses impacted by the crisis. They can be invested in economic recovery and renewal in the town, and they may fund investments in water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure.
It's huge.
And again, the Treasury Department has yet to release the specific guidance on allowable uses of the funds, and they'll determine the actual final allocations based on the most recent census data and the final language in the law. So we have a good idea of what we could spend it on, and we still have to wait for the final from the federal folks. Irrespective of that, of course, Christy and her team have been doing some thinking and planning about how to expend some of those funds. And what they did was take a look at the revenue projections for 2022, the actual receipts through Q3 of this current fiscal year, 2021. And they used 2019 as the base comparative year. Based on the estimates that were projected for 2022, we were anticipating revenue from the budget at 88.7 million. This included revenue from property taxes, motor vehicle excises, local option room occupancy, and meals tax, and other tax agreements. We projected lower numbers from the 2019 base year. In the interim, based on 2020 actuals in receipts and 2021 actuals through the third quarter of this fiscal year, the town managers are reducing the anticipated revenue by $342,000. That's their projection. So with that in mind, I'm sorry, is there a question?
I have a quick question. Are all of these, when you refer to 21 and 22, are we always talking fiscal year? Even with their
Yes.
federal monies coming in, we're always talking FY?
FY, yes.
Okay, thank you.
And the 342 is a shortfall from the planned shortfall?
Correct.
Okay.
Okay. Now, I want to emphasize something. And Christy and I met again today to talk about this, just so I was certain. They're being very conservative in those projections. So it's easy to say, well, we'll probably receive more, but we'd rather wait until the actuals come through the door.
Mhm.
So they're being very conservative in those projections. Now, with respect to the federal money, if in fact those funds are received, and if in fact we are allowed, they are not restricted to spending on revenue loss or whatever, the plan is to use $490,000 of that money to make up the fiscal year 22 revenue shortfall. Okay. Thereafter, the plan is to use approximately $770,000 of that money, and that number should stick in the back of your mind for a minute, of that money to make up for any significant revenue loss for fiscal 21.
21 or 22?
21.
Okay.
21. Remember, we're receiving 2 tranches.
Right.
Okay. They feel very strongly that the first bite at the apple of that money should be to offset revenue loss. That should be the biggest priority for those funds. Now, again, this is top line. When Christy and Leah are with us on the 22nd, we can probe more deeply into the details. If I try to get into the details of that now, I'll just confuse the issue completely. Okay? It got to be a little complex in the conversation. When those 2 tranches are used for fiscal 22 and fiscal 21, it will leave us with approximately $4.3 million in federal money. There are other opportunities to use those funds. Right now, the town wants to just, let's say, I'm going to use the word reserve those funds until we see what the actual receipts are and what transpires as we begin fiscal 22. The other issue with federal money is that the schools are going to get approximately $600,000 in federal money, over and above the $5.6 million the town is going to get. The consequence of that is unknown yet. We're not even exactly sure of that amount. It's 670. I'm sure that the superintendent and the school committee are already thinking of the uses for those funds, but we'll have a chance to speak with them on Thursday night to see if they have done any more planning. Again, remember, while these are reasonable numbers, they're not hard numbers until we see them. Okay? So I think that's, all in all, from a federal level, that's pretty good news. We don't know if the feds are going to restrict the money to the schools in some way, but that's pretty good news for us. On a state level, it's a little different. As you recall, when we met with Christy on the first budget go-round, there was some question about the governor's budget proposal, and it was substantially above what it was in fiscal year 2021. So now we're talking about the governor's budget proposal for fiscal year 22 with respect to Westborough. In fact, it was almost 2.9.
Okay. I found this on the web for who is substantially above what it was in fiscal year 2021. So now we're talking about the governor's budget proposal for fiscal.
Okay. Boy, that's an intrusive phone.
Big Brother's listening.
Big Brother is listening. Yeah.
Did it tell you how to vote yet?
Not yet, but they will. So when the fiscal 21 cherry sheet, the governor's proposal was $8,310,000 in Chapter 70 money for Westborough. Fiscal 22, it was $11,190,000. So it's about a 2.9 million delta in our favor. We seem to be the only town with that substantial a change. And so—
How much of that is due to the fact that we started our kindergarten?
There is something going on with the kindergarten. I'm not sure it's up to the tune of $2.8 million.
Yeah.
I'm going to let Amber speak to that on Thursday night. I think that would be appropriate for us to do that.
Just for reference, the kindergarten was estimated at 700,000.
Yeah.
And some of us were skeptical of that number.
Well, it's settling around 800,000, I think, Hank.
Yeah.
But the point is, we're not sure of this number. Unfortunately, the House Ways and Means Committee is doing some negotiation, and they may have a different number. So we will not know. We got some advice. When I say we, I mean the town got some advice from the state earlier this week or late last week, indicating that the likelihood of some reconciliation between the governor's budget and the Ways and Means won't take place until the end of April, around the 25th or 26th. So we won't know until then what the state funds are going to be. But again, we were being very conservative, and the town level funded fiscal year 22 based on fiscal year 21 Chapter 70 monies. So it's been a nice conservative approach. You know, I think all things considered, given all the moving parts that have been going on or that have been around, things seem to be, you know, we're managing. The town is managing based on the current fiscal year 21 budget, and, you know, we go forward. We go forward with blinders on until we know what the numbers are and when we're going to get it. So on the, you know, I guess just to reiterate, I think from my perspective, you may have your own opinions, those are positive happenings. Not just the amount of money involved, but the fact that the town is managing very conservatively, which I think people will appreciate. Any questions that I can't answer?
Yeah, Mike, I have a couple of questions. You said that there's 5 allowable uses for the federal money that's coming in, and that was to replace lost revenue, which seems to be the first thing we're doing. And that the additional ones then were to cover COVID costs, to offer aid to households and businesses. There was something in there about economic redevelopment or development, and then sewer and water expenses. Is there a committee that's coming together? I mean, does this mean we potentially have a pot of excess money to distribute to causes in need, for lack of a better way to say it? And is there a committee in town looking at that?
There's no committee that I'm aware of. The only other committee beside the AFC is the internal finance team.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Christy and I just were batting around some ideas today. You know, you may get the economic development committee who comes in and says, let's give money to some of our businesses to get them back on their feet. We may have payments to households to help folks who've struggled. We don't know. We just don't know yet. And those are just the ones that were told to us by the MMA as what they see as utilization for these funds. There's nothing cast in concrete yet.
Okay, thanks.
It is my understanding that this is all revenue side conversations, and it's my understanding that no money can be spent until it's authorized by town meeting. So if the spending is not in the budget that we review on May 15th, and if there's not a warrant article on May 15th that's approved, then nobody can spend that money. What I believe that means is that come fall town meeting, we'll unscramble a bunch of this stuff, and we'll be able to apply some of that funding. But
Well, isn't there a possibility, if we know about it before May 15th, we do a special meeting within town meeting, specifically a warrant article to spend that money?
Well, people could bring articles from the floor or articles to the meeting that are not on the warrant, I think. but it's kind of non-traditional to bring articles that are not on the warrant.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Hank. And because the other thing you mentioned, Mike, is that we have until FY24 to expend it. So while the money's coming in 2 tranches, it looks like in FY21 and FY22, we can think about it and plan through FY24. We don't have to quickly spend in the next fiscal year.
Correct.
And given that we've got like a 4.5 or 5% increase in taxes coming in FY22, I would suggest the Finance Committee should not be recommending that we spend money on things that have not already been approved and authorized and thought about. I mean, it is not free. It is not free money.
Point taken. Thank you, Hank.
Yeah. You know, they went through some potential scenarios with respect to taxes for the upcoming fiscal year. The number $452 keeps popping up, but the best case scenario is somewhere around $337 as a potential tax increase. And again, it's, you know, we still have some answers coming. And until those answers come to us, it's going to be a little hard to pin down some of the decisions. I do know that they do want to take that fiscal 21 number, 770,000, and pay back the money that was taken from free cash for this fiscal year. And that fills that hole. They also want to be recommending a conservative approach so that after fiscal 24, we're not left with a big hole in the budget that we have to fill and cannot fill it without, you know, going back to the taxpayers for it. So I think all in all, they seem to be moving in the right direction. But again, if we could be patient for a couple more, another week and a half, when we have Christy and Leah in front of us, I'm sure they'll be able to fill us in on a lot of the details.
You got some hands up, Mike.
Yep, I do. Paul?
I think Walter was ahead of me.
Oh, Walter?
Okay. And you can save this for the next time if you think it's more appropriate. But my question is, it's good to be, say, conservative on what you think you're going to have for money coming in. But at some point, doesn't that mean you're going to plan to have the taxes for that year higher than you would have if you don't plan that? Or am I thinking of it wrong?
Walter, the tax rate is not set until like October, November. So the tax rate is not set until after fall town meeting.
Okay.
And the tax rate can't be set until we have certified values for the revenues that have come in.
Excellent. So yeah, that makes sense then. So we'll know more by then.
Right.
And be adjusted at that time.
When we vote at May town meeting, we're not setting the fine detail of the tax rate. We're getting in the ballpark. The final numbers get set sometime, I don't know, October, November.
Okay, thanks.
Paul?
Yeah, I was going to mention that too about there's a flip side to conservative in that it's good in that we're avoiding surprises, but we don't want to be so conservative that we're
causing pain.
You know, that we're costing the taxpayers and building up funds or something like that.
Yeah.
The other thing I had is there's a few articles in this warrant that look like they might qualify for that category of water, sewer, and I think, you know, the infrastructure. So that might be an immediate place to, and I don't know that, once they know what the money is, I don't see any reason to not apply it there as a, you know, rather than taking it from free cash.
I think we will know much more before we walk into that town meeting.
Right.
And
We need to remember that the water and sewer money does not come out of free cash, and it does not come out of the tax rate. It comes out of the rate base. I keep calling it's not a revolving fund, it's an enterprise fund. Water and sewer is an enterprise fund. So the funding comes out of the enterprise fund.
But most of the taxpayers in town contribute to it.
Right, well, again, but it's not going to impact the tax rate. And if you want to put money into the enterprise fund to use it for water and sewer, I believe we would have to raise and we would have to transfer it in. Would require, again, town meeting action.
And the analysis is, I think that the water and sewer spending often comes when the accounts have accumulated to a point where it makes sense to spend them. Anyway, it's worth paying attention to. Yep.
Yeah, at this point in time, we have reasonable reserves in the water and sewer accounts.
Rates could be lowered in those too if we had funding that made sense to go there. So
I would be surprised if people would agree to lower the rates.
well, we're the finance committee. We talk about that.
We can talk about that. That's right. Any other questions about this? Okay. And again, we have folks coming Thursday that can help answer some questions, we hope, and certainly on the 22nd. So let's move into capital expenditures. What I'd like to do tonight, if it's okay with you guys, is cover Article 7A to 7H, and then leave Article 7I, J, and K for Thursday night when the school folks are here. All right. And Andrew, I see you got a hand up.
Yeah, I apologize. So I was trying to raise my hand as we were wrapping up the other conversation. I just did have one final question to wrap up the previous topic. And I apologize because my audio dropped at one point during your presentation. Did the town manager express any general disposition as to the level of services? Like, is the expectation steady services? Is the expectation to broaden services or to pull back? Just as a general strategy?
For which fiscal year?
I guess either fiscal year.
No expression at all.
But Michael, the budget we have, the budget that's been presented, has been presented as essentially a level service level budget. Right. It is stable service levels. Right. It is not any. There are not any substantial increases in service levels in the budget that's been presented.
Correct. But Andrew, if I understood you correctly, were you thinking that with this money coming in that we might increase service of some kind?
No, not at all, because I heard us talking about making up or holding off some money to make up some potential shortcomings. Okay. But we also know that there's other things coming down the pike, 22, 23. Yes, based on our existing budget, it's fairly level serviced. But I just wanted to make sure we are planning on keeping that level service as a general strategy, and curious to know if you heard anything that would be to the contrary of that in the next couple of years. No, I've heard nothing. I appreciate that. So sorry for distracting the conversation as we've moved on to the conversations about items 7A through H. Okay, I'd like you, Andrew, to stay on there and kind of frame the conversation based on what you know about the actions of the capital planning group. Sure. Going into the conversation this year, it was the first year that they're trying a different strategy of going about the capital appropriations and how we judge it. Specifically, they had a different grading systems, and those grades were listed as 1, 2, 3s. And they were very well defined 1, 2, 3s. It was everybody had a chance, and I shared the sheet where everybody had a chance to go through and mark what they indicated as their preferred 1, 2, 3 indicator after everybody had done a presentation. In that regard, it's very similar. But we were also told that there wasn't an expectation that as we addressed this issue that we would be sticking to the $1 million budget necessary that we've done in the past. That the final result was going to be taking a look at what everybody had voted and then stepping back and assessing. Beth, did you have a question?
Yeah, do you mind telling us which end is 1 and which end is 3?
I'm going to go with, you know what, I shared that on the note and I don't remember, but
I've got it. I
Thank you.
printed it.
Okay.
Priority, it was in the email that came to us
Yeah,
with the
okay.
rating sheet attached. Priority 1 was essential or high priority. Priority 2 was desirable priority projects, and priority 3 was deferrable, non-essential, low priority.
Thank you for being more adept at dealing with Zoom, as I have downloaded it for the first time than I have been. So I'm grateful that you were able to articulate that so clearly.
Sure.
But I think what was really different in the approach this time is that we were told not to bound our thinking in terms of the budget. What was done after we went through it, and as we were discussing, Lisa Blazewski was the chair, Steve Durrett was the co-chair. What was decided was that we actually had a series of decisions where there was a majority of people who called out ones for the priorities. And it was determined that we would take that list of all the ones where there was a majority of ones that were listed as highest priority, the essential priority, and that the town was going to look at the costs and the ultimate needs from so some of them were school, for example, and they didn't have firm prices. So the town was going to get more firm prices from the school. And then they would assemble, based upon what they thought was a reasonable-ish budget, the highest priorities that they thought that they would advance. It wasn't something that was decided on the committee's level. On the committee, we just left with the expectation that anything that didn't meet the list with enough essential votes, that was going to fall off the list, and the rest was left for Christy to do for planning, with the budget team, and to see what would fit into the budget, and to see where the money would come from, because we didn't even vote on where the money was coming from, borrows, free cash, that sort of thing. So there was a lot more latitude, and in my own mind, it felt that we left the process, deliberatively a little early, because I think some of those extra pieces would have been helpful. It was partly the timing of the group, which got together at the end of November of last year and early December of last year. So it was partly a timing as to why we didn't continue to address this. One of the parts of feedback is I think that we need to have a better process whereby we can continue to advocate for some of those elements on that list, and frame the requests as to what will end up in the warrant a little bit more concretely than we did.
Andrew, are you saying ultimately it was the town finance group and the town manager that made the final decision on these?
So yes, so there was a large list that we as a committee winnowed down to a materially smaller list, and from that materially smaller list, the town decided to go and pursue things like final estimates for costs, because DPW, I think, and the school were both had a number of costs that they hadn't put in stone yet, because they were still working through them. I think they're using best alternative estimates for projects, for some of the things they were asking for some of the capital equipment. So the final steps of attaching dollar values and determining what would migrate to the warrant would come from the list that we as a capital campaign committee had winnowed down.
Anybody have any other questions for Hank before we get started? Okay, why don't we just go ahead and just go through the articles and see what's to be discussed as we go through them. So the first article is 7A. It's the replacement of the animal control vehicle, and it's a requested expenditure of $28,435, and it looks like it is coming from free cash. Any questions on that? Any concerns about that?
Michael, are you asking, we're not voting on these?
No, I think we agreed that we would go through the articles and get a preliminary sense.
Right.
And then on the 29th, we would go through a final vote.
Right. And so, because, we're going to get more information, the big picture when Christie comes.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Any questions about that? I mean, if you've got some questions that you want to address to Christie, I do know she's going on vacation on Wednesday and will not be back until the Wednesday before the meeting. So I can convey any questions to Leah so that they're prepared when they walk in the door on, so to speak, on the 22nd.
Can I go back to ask a question based on the lovely chart? So, Andrew, when you were all said and done with that great chart you created, if the ratings were averaged, because I tend to not want to look at a bunch and say, oh, well, there's 3 2s and 4 1s or whatever. I just sort of want a final number. Would that give you a sense of rating of the projects relative to each other? Or was there an element that's a little bit too random for that?
So there was a discussion in committee about the possibility of averaging ratings like you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
I had said going into the conversation, just having numbers like 1, 2, and 3 would give you a deviation of numbers that is going to be far too small to be able to determine the value in like relative merit. You know, when something is separated by 0.05, like what is that really telling you versus something that's 0.02? You know, it's just the numbers are too close to really have a passionate distinction between them if you're going to be able to articulate it that way. So what was determined was that the more appropriate cutoff, because it seemed to get us in the right ballpark for the number of projects we were looking to do and the sort of ballpark where we would expect to try and spend money. The more appropriate way was to ask the question, as we looked at each of these projects, how many people really thought that they were worth considering essentially? And then go further from that and dig down on those. So we did a hard cutoff based upon the number of people who voted for something as being essential. And I would not put much merit in weighted rankings between the details between those two, because in discussion, people would change opinions a little bit. Not so much that things moved up and down the list, but certainly so that you could tell that there were things that were very closely rated that maybe people might have felt more strongly about than others, but it doesn't really come through in the ratings that we used.
Okay.
So my look at it, my hand's not up. The people with hands up should go first.
That's what I was going to do. Zafar?
Walter was ahead of me.
Walter?
Right. I guess this is for Andrew question. I look at the animal control to get us back on the topic we had migrated to. And there are 2 1s and the rest are 2s. But that one, that was, I guess, above the bar then? Or was there not an exact bar? Or?
I'm trying to remember back to the specifics of the animal control discussion. I think that one may have been one that it was in the ones for consideration. Again, as long as we had enough people who were interested in it, it made it to the list for further consideration. And it may be one of those conversations where, as we had conversations, people felt strongly enough about it to keep it on the list and keep it considered. And that would then go back to Christie and team to say this actually has value that they think is worth standing up as part of what they've defined.
I mean, does anybody have a problem with replacing an 18-year-old pickup truck? Please help me. Going to spend $28,435 to replace an 18-year-old pickup truck. That's a pretty cost-effective pickup truck, and we got a lot of good use out of it.
Before we get there, we had a couple more questions. Zafar?
Yeah, this is just for my understanding. So I was in some of the meetings, recordings I was watching, some of our teams from Westborough share the resources with the neighboring teams. Is the animal control team one of them? Like, the vehicles and the members of the team, they are part of Northborough or some other surrounding towns?
Can I speak as the liaison?
Don't we do it? I'm sorry, Beth, go ahead.
Yeah, so there's some kind of cooperating agreement with local towns. I'm not sure how formalized it is, but I believe Melissa McKendrick, who's our animal control officer who came and talked to us, is primarily here in Westborough, but there's definitely some friendliness with at least one other town in terms of sharing when appropriate. But I don't know what the proportion is. So I don't want to.
Grafton. Yeah.
Right. Grafton is the primary, but I think she mentioned she also does something with Shrewsbury, or there's talk about it.
Yeah.
And there's some kind of arrangement, but basically we own the vehicle here in Westborough.
Exactly. Well, Jody.
Yeah, I guess I had a comment on just looking at the rating sheets and the ratings. So rather than just averages, I did take a look down here at the items that made this sheet and saw how many ones, how many of the 7 raters rated it the highest priority. Then when we got to the animal control vehicle, Andrew Bradley, did the team know, the raters know that this was the replacement of a 2002 18-year-old pickup, or were they just trying to decide how important an animal control truck was without that context?
They did know, yes, and there were other discussions, as there were for any vehicle like this, where can the vehicle be borrowed from some other place, or can it be used or repurposed from another area that has these vehicles, and it was determined no, that wouldn't be appropriate use, particularly as we looked at the fuel, the gas mileage, where the town is trying to buy more fuel-efficient vehicles. And repurposing other vehicles was not going to be effective in that regard.
Okay. All right. So, I mean, it's interesting that I see only 2 number 1s on the animal control purchase, but I would tend to support that article. So it's going to be a little bit of a play back and forth between what we think of the expenditure, what the committee thought of the expenditure, and what showed up in the warrant.
And what
in terms of
manager and her team.
Yeah, but in terms of the vote on the advice, that's, we're looking at several angles there.
Okay.
We did have a presentation on this as part of the police department, and you may remember it's a minivan, so it's a better equipped vehicle, and the prices the prices on those are pretty good. I asked about it because I had just priced them and I got a better price on that, but it didn't include the equipment that they had. So we did have a pretty good presentation on this back then.
Yeah.
Yeah, I believe vehicles are purchased off of a state contract. So we don't go out for bid or whatever, they buy them off a state contract because it's much more effective, and it's generally cost effective to buy them off the state contract.
Beth, you get the last word on this one.
Well, actually, I'm going back to the comment about the ratings, and I'm almost wondering if 3s is like, hey, we're less interested, because priority 1 is a priority, and priority 2 is a desirable priority. It's priority 3 that says deferrable, and so I'm wondering if I care more about a lower number of 3s, and maybe 1s and 2s are more equal because they're both considered priorities.
Okay.
So I just thought I'd weigh that in there, that difference may be, the 3s may be the one I want to focus on as against.
All right. Well,
but anyway, I'm in favor of purchasing the vehicle based on what I know.
Let's be careful not to get lost in the weeds on those numbers.
Yeah. Okay.
Because we weren't privy to the conversation. Only Andrew was.
Yeah, I think it's a lost opportunity because it's too bad. I mean, in effect, what I think Andrew was saying is that this document may have changed. The sentiment behind it may have changed, and that so how much do we put into it? It's too bad because that's their purpose. I would think we'd have priorities that we could deal with if we needed to cut or if we had surplus.
Well, there may be a lesson learned for that group from this go round. I'm sure that they could take lessons from it, and improve their process.
And it really was a discussion from the get-go that this is going to be a learning experience, being so different from what it was before, and trying to take a more broad view of it. But I do think the pendulum, to me, it felt like the pendulum swung too far away from what we were going to be able to actually lock down, and where there was control being handed back over to the town for good reasons. There was still additional value they certainly added. But it did feel like our work was unfinished to me when we left.
Yes. Okay, let's move on, unless we want to talk about animal control vehicles some more. Let's move on to the PPE for the fire department. This is a request for $86,000 from free cash to another set of turnout gear for 33 of the fire department's firefighters. Melanie, I know you're here with us. Do you have any information about what the fire department may be thinking since they got their grant?
You're on mute.
I'm not. Melanie?
No, Melanie is.
Oh,
Can you hear me now?
yes.
Okay, sorry. So since they received that grant, they have lost a member to the team to another organization. So in hiring a new person, they're now going to have to fit that new person with 2 sets of gear. So that additional funding that we see is in conjunction with the 86 they're already asking for.
So it's over and above the 86?
Over and above, right.
Okay. And it's because we lost the firefighter.
Right.
And we've got to give him or her 2 sets of equipment.
Correct.
Okay.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Melanie, do you happen to know if the equipment is ever reusable on any level, or is it tailor-made for one person?
It is. They did that in the that meeting, the big meeting that we sat in, and they, if you remember, they put 2 firefighters side by side, one being 5'9" and the other being 6'3", and showed how there is no equivalent. Each person is built differently. The gear has to fit appropriately. You can't put the 6'2" guy in the 5'7" guy's gear. So, and I did ask the question with regard to when they leave our jurisdiction, go to another surrounding town, have we thought of giving the option of the next town purchasing the gear? But some of the logos and stuff are in each town. There's logos, there's patching. Apparently there's stuff that's indigenous to whoever they work for that it wouldn't make it transferable.
So remind me how much 2 sets of turnout gear for one person is?
I believe it's about 15,000. So I believe it's like 7,000 a set.
So I just find it really hard to believe you can't, that if you hire someone, spend $15,000 on their gear and they leave in a year or 2, that $15,000 worth of gear is not going to have some value to the town. Maybe you hire another 5'7". No, you wait until you hire another 5'7".
That's your criteria.
No,
yeah.
No, my criteria
Any 5'8" or over do not apply.
That's not what I was saying. I was saying, would there potentially be a time when you would hire personnel that could use the gear, or is that $15,000 gone?
No, I would think that if we would hold on to the gear, and there might be someone that futuristically could use it, or when someone of the same stature, their gear wears out, we could sub it out.
Right.
Or use it during training, where maybe it doesn't need to be perfect because it's not genuine fire or something.
At one level, you got to trust that Patrick knows what he's doing.
Yep, good point.
And that he's managing the business. If we don't think Patrick knows what he's doing and is managing the business, then we have a slightly different action plan.
Yeah, well, let's not go there tonight, please.
Yeah,
Paul,
no, I think when it comes to resources, those guys are acting as frugally as they can with the resources that they are given.
Yep.
The thing is, when it comes to safety of these guys, it's not worth,
Yep.
a few dollars to go, can we reuse this or can't we?
Right. And there's no argument for that. Yeah, I get it.
Paul?
On a general level, we exist in order to question finances. If we just accept that everybody's great, and I agree they all are, then we have no purpose. On the specifics of this, 86,000 for 33 firefighters is about 2,600 each. So how do we get to 15,000?
I don't know. I can ask.
And I forget what the number for the grant was.
It was 14,000 and some change.
Okay. All right. So I don't see the numbers working. We're talking about everybody getting a new set for 86,000, unless that's only partial. So it's not 15,000 or 7,500 each.
Well, I think in the write-up, didn't it say that they had already purchased some?
Yeah,
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah.
it's partial.
Yeah. So I don't think this is a full. But
I remember number 17 and number 33, but I don't know the total number of firefighters.
It says this is for 33 of the department's firefighters. So
Right.
whatever else was spent seems like it's not part of this.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe we need some clarification on that, Melanie. Thank you.
Okay.
Any other
Yeah.
questions on that? Any comments? Okay, staying with the fire department. 7C, replacement for engine number 2. Request for free cash of $378,662 from the stabilization fund, and another $366,338 to be added to this from the stabilization fund, for the total amount of a lot of money.
745?
745. Engine number 2 is a 16-year-old piece of equipment, 15 years old. Sorry, 20. For my math, I
24,
gotta stop
25.
drinking before these meetings.
1996. Yeah.
1996. Pierce
With
Arrow.
a year
Pierce
lag
Saber.
on purchase.
Yeah. What was that, Beth?
With a year lag
Yes,
from time of purchase to arrival.
correct. So, any questions on or concerns about this expenditure in this article? Okay.
Not so much for the article, but I think this is one of those cases where the CapEx committee needs to do a better job of making sure we're socking away money over time so that we can anticipate and pay for these things better in advance, not just 50-50. Because these big equipment pieces are ones we know will last 20 years, and we should start forward paying for that to some extent. But I think this is these types of large investments are one of the reasons we try and build up our stabilization fund, but I think we can still be doing better.
I think we're doing better than we have, though, the fact that we have 50% socked away. And it may be timing because this fund isn't that old.
Okay. Good point.
And it is for the benefit of the people, the taxpayers for the next 20 years, let's say, whatever it is. So, I mean, in that case, you might say it should be borrowed, but in any case, not so much should be paid by past taxpayers.
Okay. Any other questions or concerns about this article? All right, moving on. 7D, police cruiser replacements. They're asking for $130,000 from free cash to replace 2 police cruisers and associated equipment, along with all incidental costs and the costs related thereto. They are looking at hybrid vehicles, which will save some, according to Ford Motor Company, some significant amounts in maintenance and utilization costs. Any questions about this article?
When we're buying vehicles now, given that we have this sustainable plan, are hybrids considered going towards that carbon zero sufficiently, or should we be going one step further and looking at electric vehicles?
Well, go ahead, Hank. It looks like you're going to say something.
Hybrids are a transition vehicle. The hybrids are the best solution we have available today.
They are the best solution that we have available today. But there was one other point that was made about public safety vehicles. And there may be, based on, going back in my memory, based on conversations I had with the police chief and some other folks in town, that you can't have one of these vehicles running out of charge in the middle of a response to something.
These vehicles are on the road 24/7, 365 days a year, other than when they're in for absolute maintenance. You can't have the darn thing being recharged every other shift.
No, you can't.
Yeah, but you can't have a, I don't understand that argument at all. You can't have a car running out of gas either.
Yeah,
Charging your car is no
many
difference.
shift.
The issue is taking the vehicle off the road long enough to recharge it. The technology doesn't exist yet to be able to recharge the car in the 15 minutes that it takes to refill a gas tank.
The chief has told us that there are only so many officers on duty on every shift. So there aren't all the cars we have in the fleet out on every shift.
But we don't
That's
have the
correct.
electric stations either. We only have a limited number of electric stations right now.
So it's again,
In any case, it's not practical for this year.
Yeah, I mean, at this point in time, I don't believe it's technologically practical.
Any other comments? Okay. 7E, 1-ton utility truck with crane. Free cash of 40,666, plus 40,667 from water retained earnings to purchase this vehicle, which will replace an existing 1-ton utility truck with crane.
Do these go hybrid?
I'm not seeing anything in this.
I would be surprised if people have come up with hybrid versions of these very specialized vehicles. I don't know, but I would be surprised.
The electric heavy vehicles are not quite here. This is an interesting one to me in that only 2 people on the committee gave this a high priority rating, but it's also the funding source is not, it's not taxpayer funded. I don't know if that makes a difference. It's just interesting.
So I think to the funding source, I should point out there were actually two internal funds, retained earning funds paying for this. I think I only heard the water retained, but it's sewer and water are both kicking in 40.
There's 40 coming from free cash as well.
Yep. So there's 3 total, but there's the 40 free cash and then the 2 others.
Yeah.
Right. It's just that only 2 people on the capital expenditures committee found this the highest priority.
But remember, nobody found it the lowest.
There you go.
And I'll also say that there were a ton of things from DPW that were being considered as well. So this was being pitted against a lot of other DPW requests as well. So,
okay.
And please let's not forget that the free cash originated, has its genesis in taxpayers at some point. Okay. Walter?
Yeah, so I guess just a clarification from Andrew, then the list that we have here is the cream of the crop, not the entire list. So if we saw the list you started with, it would have been huge compared to this.
Not huge, but it was longer, yes.
And there would have been ones that only got 3s or something like that and were gone.
Yes.
Got it. Okay, that makes more sense.
Okay, moving on to 7F. and that is the 1-ton pickup with plow replacements. They're looking for money from free cash, from sewer retained earnings and water retained earnings. And it looks like they want to replace 2 1-ton pickups with plows. Again, there's no indication of whether or not these are hybrid or electric vehicles. Any questions or concerns about this? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to the loader. Again, a request for funds from free cash and of $66,666 and essentially equal amounts from both water retained earnings and sewer retained earnings. Questions, concerns about this request, this article? Okay. Hearing none. Moving on to 7H, building condition assessment. Request for $45,000 to assess buildings in, I don't know how many buildings they mentioned, Forbes Community Building, Westborough Golf Club, Harvey Building, that have known capital requirements, capital maintenance requirements. So they basically want $45,000 for a study. Questions?
I'll just say up front, given recent history and I don't know, common sense of reading this article, I'll be very skeptical not vote for another study. This seems like stuff that can be determined by talking to vendors, by your own experience, and then for at least recent land acquisition, we totally ignored a study like, that was done. So I'm going to be kind of against studies. And this is the first one.
Okay. I think there was, when this came up initially, was not there a sense that we didn't have anyone on the town payroll who could perform these functions without, because of the specialized nature of some of them? Could perform.
Yeah, that was the argument. Yeah.
That was the argument. Okay.
This is the logical equivalent of when you're buying a secondhand home, you hire a home inspector to go in and do a detailed assessment for you, because it requires a lot of expertise and a lot of time and energy to go in and understand what needs to be fixed and how safe or unsafe the buildings are.
Okay. Walter?
And another element to come out of this is that some of these buildings will need significant updates. One of the things, just like studies of departments to see how well they're staffed, they always say they need more people. The reality of a study of a building to see its condition will always reveal that it needs a lot more work. And I think that given the age of some of these buildings, given that they are town properties that don't have a lot of history in terms of significant updates, if we're going to invest money on this, there's a logic to staying informed about where you're going to be investing in these and where it might be worth it.
Okay. Walter?
Just the counter to that is if they discover a whole lot of work needed, maybe they wouldn't invest in it and dispose of the property. My question is more, is it just me, or is it odd that everything else on this capital thing is actual what I would call capital, and this is a study, which seems to me to be more of an expense?
It's the first step in a capital expenditure. Let's find out what's wrong with the buildings. Oh, by the way, with at least 2 of these buildings, the Harvey Building and the Forbes Community Building, the community needs to have a conversation about what they intend to do with the buildings. Because today they're sort of orphan buildings. They're buildings that we have that, one of them, Forbes Community Building, we kind of use for a variety of charitable activities. And the Harvey Building, I think we use as a big old storage building, and nobody really knows what to do with it.
Boy Scouts meet there too, so.
Well, that's another charitable activity.
Yep.
I'd be very unhappy if we decided to throw the Boy Scouts out. But by the way, I'm aware of 50 or 60 Boy Scout troops that don't have a Forbes community building and they're successful. So maybe if the building's not safe, we ought to throw them out.
Okay.
Well, and I think that not safe condition is what makes me balk at the idea of like not doing the study and not finding it. But the fact that these aren't being well utilized, potentially absolutely valid in any number of ways that you can measure it. But the reality is they are being populated and personed by a lot of different groups. And if there are significant issues to these, are we exposing ourselves to risk if we allow people to continue to use them?
Okay, Jody?
Yeah, the study makes sense to me. I would hope that if the study gets done, it has value as a first step in taking the next steps to fix or rehabilitate or reprogram the building. But it also gives us the information on how much it's going to cost, how vulnerable the structure is, and what it might take to get it done, to make it useful again. So, I mean, my beloved high school, which I would have wanted to preserve and reuse, got torn down after one of these studies was done because the cost of bringing it up to date and up to code just outweighed a new building. Anyway, I think we have to know. I think they're community assets, they're municipal assets that we have to manage, and we have to know what's going on with it. And in order to make the decision about whether to keep it and keep using it or replace it.
Paul, you got a hand up again?
Yeah, I just have a question. I don't know which building is the Harvey building, but it's Hank, you're on the committee for the, however you say that, the Hokomo. There's a building there as well, right?
Hokomo, yes, we're having a conversation about whether there's any of the departments believe it would be valuable to them to use the building. That building, by the way, will require substantial maintenance, substantial investment to bring it up to current codes. It's not even close to current code.
So I think it should be on this list, right, too?
No. Well, again, it's not time yet. That's why we have the reuse committee. If nobody wants it, we'll tear it down.
Anything else on this article? That's good input from everybody. Thank you. Okay, we're going to skip the next three until Thursday. Did I hear a hand come up? No, okay. There are a couple of other articles that we have two new ones that showed up in version 7, but I'd like to go back to the article on restocking Sandra Pond and
Mike, we're skipping the rest of them until schools come in. Excuse me. Yeah. Now I'm with you.
Yeah. Yes. We go back to Article 3B, restocking Sandra Pond. Walter, do you want to tell the committee what you discovered, and then I'll speak to the follow-up conversation?
Okay, I wasn't prepared for that, but basically I saw on Facebook a posting by one of the fish wardens that they had raised $500 and the town had kicked in some money, and that they would be stocking sometime in early April, which is different than our discussion and thought process that extra 4,000 was for this year and then next. So that, anyway, I brought it to Michael's attention because it sounded different than I was thinking, and it could certainly could affect our decision.
Who found the money?
The Recreation Department. So I had a follow-up conversation with Christy, and part of this has to do with the movement of the meeting, the town meeting, to May. Town meeting in May would be too late to properly restock the pond if we waited till town meeting appropriated the money. So with the donation in hand, the folks responsible for this went to the Recreation Department and asked the Recreation Department to fund the restocking now in April, and that if the article was passed in May, they would be, that money would be returned to their budget. And I guess that cleared through all of the powers that be. If the article doesn't pass, the Recreation Department is out whatever money they let me use the word loaned, and I put quotes around that. But if the article passes, then it becomes a wash. So that's why they're going to do the stocking in April.
For 5,000.
It's going to be 4,000, and another 4,000 is going to be requested for fiscal 22.
Okay, sorry. I thought I had heard 5. That's okay.
4,000. 500 was the donation.
Oh.
Right. So that's the.
I have a question. I know this is a small amount, so I don't want to belabor it, but is there any quantification of or anything? I mean, anecdotally, I go to Sandra Pond a lot and I see 1 or 2 fisher people. So I don't know, maybe through the sale of licenses or something that we know how many people use this, or I don't know. I just don't see a lot of usage, but it could be that it's just, not apparent.
Well, we've had this conversation before. We're essentially spending money for a group of people to fish Sandra Pond. We don't know how many people that is. We don't know if they're all Westborough residents. But anybody who fishes there is supposed to have a license. And why could they not use the licensure fees either in the current amount or by raising them to cover at least the stocking of the pond? We've had this conversation. And
it might be appropriate to ask Leah when she's here to understand, where does the revenue that comes from licenses go?
I thought it was a state license.
Yeah, I did too.
Oh, so if it's a state license,
and you're
it's state
required to
money.
be a Westborough resident to fish at Sandra Pond, but I think the license is just in Massachusetts.
I feel like I see more people fishing at Mill Pond, and yet we've never seen a request to stock Mill Pond.
May not need to.
Well, okay.
It seems like the interesting part to this is not the argument of fishing or not, but it is that if you have money in your budget to do that, then do you need that money? Or what? And we made a point earlier of, shouldn't this be in the rec department's budget? And we're seemingly told, no, it should be a vote. But now I'm completely confused.
Now the rec department is actually loaning them money to, yeah. I think it's a good question for Leah. And let's find out. Let's try to clear this up once and for all.
Yeah, and I'd love to know who our fishing Sandra Pond constituency is.
Yes. Are we subsidizing a small amount of people?
Well, a small amount of people are important too, but I would love to just gauge the demand and who's benefiting.
Yeah. Okay.
Would it be appropriate to ask our Recreation Department liaison to have a conversation with Jennifer and ask her to give us an understanding of why this is a good expenditure, how it benefits, who does it benefit in town, and do we have any estimate of how many people it benefits?
Who's the rec department liaison?
That's me. Andrew here. I can reach out.
Thank you. Great. So we'll look forward to your report on, let's focus on the school committee this week, and we'll look forward to your report next week.
You betcha.
Thank you, Andrew. Articles 27 was a golf course safety net, and Article 28 was tree pruning. I asked Hank if he wouldn't mind looking at the article on the golf course safety net. Hank, were you able to find out any?
Yep. You may or may not be aware that on what's the 7th hole on the golf course, directly behind the green for the 7th hole is the maintenance building. And there's a probably 30-foot high net on steel poles behind that green, between the green and the maintenance building. And the purpose of that net is to prevent balls from going in there and either hitting employees who are working in the equipment area in front of the maintenance building, or actually going in and hitting the maintenance building and doing damage. And the nets are old and deteriorated, and they need to be replaced.
So how long do they think one lasts?
I didn't ask them how long they think it lasts. Those nets have been there at least 20 years.
And it's coming out of their retained earnings, correct?
It's coming out of their the country club retained earnings.
Okay.
Can they offset the cost by selling golf balls?
We have changed the business model at the golf course, and we're now operating it not as a country club, but as a town resource. The manager of the golf course is a town employee, and all of the revenue that's generated on the golf course does go to the town.
And the balls that hit the net stay on town property and we can sell them?
Well, the balls that hit the net bounce back and stay on the golf course. So theoretically, the golfers will pick them up. If we took the netting down, the golf balls would hit the maintenance building and we'd have to repair it.
We could sell those.
And those we could sell, right?
We just need looser nets so that the balls don't bounce back.
Right.
Pay for an extra 3 feet of net so that the balls don't bounce back.
Trap them.
Oh, God. Okay.
A little gutter system at the bottom to direct them into your hole?
Right. Yeah. Into a big bucket. Any other comments about this?
Just an observation that Articles 27 and 28 are still named the same thing.
Yeah.
Hoping that's going to be fixed in the future.
I'm sure it was a typo. Thank you, Hank, for digging out that information, or netting us that information. Sorry. Any more discussion about Article 28, the tree pruning in the Rotary?
Yeah, I guess. Why do the trees need pruned?
The argument, I won't use the word argument.
I mean, I'm just kind of surprised that the Recreation Department takes responsibility for maintaining the Rotary. It didn't seem like a recreation asset.
Yeah,
I think that's part of the typo. I think it's
That's the
DPW.
typo.
that's the typo. Yeah.
So they're doing it in order,
DPW.
Yeah.
and the purpose is to maintain a healthy tree canopy. I mean, we've had it done to our trees. If you don't prune them and take care of them over their lifespan, limbs blow down and yeah.
Right, and I guess part of the question is, how often does this need to be done? Are we doing it on the right cycle so that it's not as, like, if you do it every 5 years, is it less expensive than if you do it every 10 years? Are we doing it approprially?
Don't they know? Doesn't the proponent of the article know?
Well, it's just interesting to me that this is a.
I'll tell you what, I can talk, I didn't realize it was DPW. I thought it was Rec Department. If it's DPW, I'll talk to the DPW and get some dialogue on how come they're proposing this at this time, and why it's not just part of their budget and such.
We'll learn something about healthy tree canopies.
Yeah,
And that we need a professional arborist to come in to do that because it's beyond the capacity of the DPW regular staff.
Yeah, and I think we do have a person in the DPW who's a registered arborist. I have to verify that, but I believe we have somebody. So we're getting good advice, I think, but I'll make the phone calls and bring answers.
Thank you. Okay, anything else on articles before we move on to budget adjustment?
I don't want to put Mr. Arnold on the spot, but I think there were a couple articles we we're gonna get a little more feedback from Jonna. Maybe, I don't know if he's gotten his information yet or not.
Anything in particular? And I'll try to quickly.
I'd have to go back and,
You're talking about the town seal or the one about,
yeah. there's
or the
probably-
changing of the timing of the election and annual meeting?
I
Those
think-
sound good.
Did you
Well,
have?
I think you told us about the timing. I think it was more the town seal that you still had questions.
Yeah, I'm
on.
actually in the middle of drafting an email to the selectmen now to essentially
Okay.
make sure I get clarity so I can properly interview candidates and get the charge. And I'm in the middle of drafting some. It says if they see fit, if they want to change the wording, it's fine with me. Essentially, so I haven't finished the email yet, but as I've been listening, I've been typing it, and I'm trying to provide clarity between the first part of the charge, which is to consider proposing a town seal, and then later on, it said the charge might be to propose a process, and I want to make sure it's clear both to people who apply to the committee and to me when I'm selecting people to be on this committee about whether the committee should or shouldn't actually go through the process of proposing a seal, because they're not contradictory, but they could be viewed as contradictory. But I'll report back after I finish my email and see if the selectmen have any more discussions about it before the town meeting. I'm mostly just trying to get it so I'm clear, and also so the town meeting doesn't get bogged down in the same question of, so is the committee supposed to propose one or just propose the process for proposing one? So,
John, Hank Roche, I would suggest that on this particular article also, the actual charge that people bring to the floor, I can't remember what we call it now.
the motion?
I'm sorry, I apologize, the motion.
Yep.
How the motion is worded will be really, really important.
Right. Well, I assume that the intent is for the motion to be to approve the article as written, and that's why I'm trying to make it clear that the charge of the committee is clearly articulated, so we don't have to get into multiple levels of amendment. But there's still a few meetings. There's still a meeting for them to talk about. So I'm going to try to get that wrangled out, and hopefully we can get that worked out before the meeting, so the discussion with the voters is on a clear motion with a clear charge to the committee.
And it's your expectation that the committee will be a subcommittee of the town meeting?
Right now it's proposed that I'm the appointing authority, so they would be a committee appointed to report back to the town meeting.
Right, as opposed to reporting to the Board of Selectmen and them making a decision.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure the process will be that they'll go to the selectmen and report their findings. But right now, everything I've heard is that the town seal has to be approved by town meeting. So eventually it would come back to town meeting anyway.
Any other questions for John or on any other article? Okay, moving on. You all had a chance to look at the budget adjustment on the expense side, effective March 15th. So there was a net reduction in expenses of $144,000. A good chunk of it coming out of wages and salary expense and also insurance. Any concerns? I think it's a plus that they went through this. If you want to get into the details, it's attached. I'm not sure it's less than 1% of the budget, whether it's worthwhile going through those changes in any detail, other than the top line 144 reduction.
And Michael, again, a question we had earlier in the meeting, these adjustments still support a level service budget?
Yes, as far as I know, there's been no mention in any public, private, or group meeting that I've had over the last 2-3 months that talks about changes in services, levels of service. Okay.
Has OPEB been brought back up?
A couple of times. And, again, we have no legal, this is what I'm being told, we have no legal obligation to fund that. Okay. But they will try to fund it if they can as time progresses. It's basically an insurance payment. Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. Any other questions? All right. The school superintendent and the chair of the school committee are going to be joining us on Thursday. I know that some of you have submitted questions that Beth forwarded on. Are there any other concerns or questions that you would like to articulate now? I watched the school committee meeting in part, and they're anticipating being here at the AFC. And, you know, the timing is good. They want to circle back to their budget to get a feel and get prepped for the town meeting. And I think the perspective is coming to the AFC is in line with that thinking. And it's also in line with the thinking of us going back and getting a reaffirmation of those numbers in case there were any changes since we last spoke with them. Any other questions for the school committee or the superintendent? Okay, so they've got our questions, and if you come up with something, then we'll just do it at the, oh, Dr. Siddiqui, is your hand up? Dr. Siddiqui?
No, not my hand is not up.
Oh, okay, sorry. Okay, any future draft agendas? No, we're good. So the next meeting is Thursday, and then we'll decide. We'll probably meet on Monday to do a recap and get prepped for town manager on Thursday, the 22nd. No future draft agendas, any committee liaison reports. Public reminders.
Wear masks, socially distance, and get your vaccines.
Okay. May I have a motion to adjourn?
I move that we adjourn the meeting.
Second.
Second? You guys want to stick around tonight?
Second.
Thank you, Hank. Okay, Ms. Blumberg.
Blumberg, yes.
Yep. Ms. Board.
Board, yes.
Mr. Bradley.
Bradley, yes.
Ms. Hensley.
Hensley, yes.
Mr. Ugal.
Yes.
Mr. Leslie.
Yes.
Mr. Rauch.
Roush, yes.
Dr. Siddiqui.
Siddiqui, yes.
And Beretti, yes. So we are adjourned 9:00. Thank you, folks. Good hour and